Make sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon to get notified about our future videos. To the questions, question 1. Your network contains an Active Directory domain named adatom.com that is synced to Azure AD. The domain contains 100 user accounts. The city attribute for all the users is set to the city where the users resides. You need to modify the value of the city attribute to the three-letter airport code of each city. What should you do? The correct option is A. From Windows PowerShell on a domain controller, run the get AD user and set AD user cmdlets. The get AD user and set AD user cmdlets are used to retrieve and modify user accounts in Active Directory. You can use these cmdlets to bulk update the city attribute for all the users in the domain by using a CSV file that contains the mapping of the city names to the airport codes. Question 2. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You need to add additional on Microsoft.com domains to the subscription. The additional domains must be assignable as email addresses for users. What is the maximum number of on Microsoft.com domains the subscription can contain? The correct option is C, 5. The correct answer is C. You can add additional on Microsoft.com domains to your Microsoft 365 subscription, but you are limited to a total of 5 on Microsoft.com domains in your Microsoft 365 environment. Once they are added, they cannot be removed. You can use these domains as email addresses for your users as well as for other services such as SharePoint and Teams. Question 3. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You need to configure a compliance solution that meets the following requirements: defines sensitive data based on existing data samples, automatically prevents data that matches the samples from being shared externally in Microsoft SharePoint or email messages. Which two components should you configure? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are A and E, that is, a trainable classifier and a data loss prevention policy. The correct answers are A and E. A. A trainable classifier is used to define sensitive data based on existing data samples. E. A data loss prevention policy is used to automatically prevent data that matches the samples from being shared externally in Microsoft SharePoint or email messages. Question 4. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 tenant. Users store data in the following locations: Microsoft Teams, Microsoft OneDrive, Microsoft Exchange Online, and Microsoft SharePoint. You need to retain Microsoft 365 data for 2 years. What is the minimum number of retention policies that you should create? The correct option is C, 3. There is a trap with this one. You need two policies for Teams: Teams channel slash chats, Teams private channel messages, and lastly, OneDrive, SharePoint, or Exchange. Question 5. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You register two applications named App 1 and App 2 to Azure AD. You need to ensure that users who connect to App 1 require multi-factor authentication. MFA is required only for App 1. What should you do? The correct option is A. From the Microsoft Entra Admin Center, create a conditional access policy. The correct answer is A. A conditional access policy is a way to enable and enforce MFA for specific applications or users in Microsoft Entra. Question 6. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. You plan to create a data loss prevention policy that will be applied to all available locations. Which conditions can you use in the DLP rules of the policy? The correct option is A. Sensitive info types. Sensitive info types are predefined patterns that can help you identify and protect sensitive data such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, bank account numbers, and so on. You can use sensitive info types as conditions in your DLP rules to detect and protect data that matches these patterns. For example, you can create a DLP rule that blocks the external sharing of documents that contains credit card numbers. Question 7. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. You need to compare the current Safe Links configuration to the Microsoft recommended configurations. What should you use? The correct option is D. The configuration analyzer. The goal of the configuration analyzer is to compare Exchange Online protection policies currently configured with MS recommendations. There are two tabs named Standard Recommendations and Strict Recommendations that give the gap between current configuration and MS recommendations. Question 8. Your network contains an on premises Active Directory domain named contoso.com. The domain contains 1000 Windows 10 devices. You perform a proof of concept deployment of Microsoft Defender for endpoint for 10 test devices. During the onboarding process, you configure Microsoft Defender for endpoint related data to be stored in the United States. You plan to onboard all the devices to Microsoft Defender for endpoint. You need to store the Microsoft Defender for endpoint data in Europe. What should you do first? The correct option is D. Offboard the test devices. Answer is D. To onboard them all in Europe, you first have to offboard the 10 that are onboarded in US. Question 9. You have a new Microsoft 365 E5 tenant. You need to enable an alert policy that will be triggered when an elevation of Microsoft Exchange Online administrative privileges is detected. What should you do first? The correct option is A. Enable auditing. The first step you should take is to enable auditing in order to monitor and get alerted on specific activities such as elevation of administrative privileges. Auditing needs to be enabled in your Microsoft 365 environment. Auditing will record events such as changes in permissions and other administrative activities, which can then be monitored through alert policies to notify administrators when specific event occur. Question 10. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You configure a new Azure AD enterprise application named App 1. App 1 requires that a user be assigned the reports reader role. Which type of group should you assign the reports reader role to access App 1? The correct option is C, a security group that has assigned membership. You cannot assign Azure AD roles to dynamic groups, and you don't need a mailbox, SharePoint, etc. So it is not a 365 group. The correct answer is C. This type of group can be used to assign users and groups to an enterprise application and to a specific app role. Question 11. Your network contains an Active Directory forest named contoso.local. You purchase a Microsoft 365 subscription, you plan to move to Microsoft 365 and to implement a hybrid deployment solution for the next 12 months. You need to prepare for the planned move to Microsoft 365. What is the best action to perform before you implement directory synchronization? More than one answer choice may achieve the goal. Select the best answer. The correct option is D. Purchase a custom domain name. The best action to take before implementing directory synchronization for a hybrid deployment with Microsoft 365 would be to purchase a custom domain name. When you set up Microsoft 365, you are prompted to provide your domain name. This domain should match the domain you use within your on-premises Active Directory environment to ensure a seamless user experience and email delivery. Question 12. Your company has a Microsoft 365 subscription. You need to identify all the users in the subscription who are licensed for Office 365 through a group membership. The solution must include the name of the group used to assign the license. What should you use? The correct option is C. The licenses blade in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. There is no license report in reports in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Question 13. Hotspot. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that contains the users shown in the following table. You need to configure a dynamic user group that will include the guest users in any department that contains the word support. How should you complete the membership rule? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, bracket on user type. The correct option is dash EQ, inverted commas, guest, bracket off, and bracket on user.department. The correct option is dash contains support. The correct option is dash contains inverted commas support. Question 14. Hotspot. Your company uses a legacy on-premises LDAP directory that contains 100 users. The company purchases a Microsoft 365 subscription. You need to import the 100 users into Microsoft 365 by using the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Which type of file should you use and which properties are required? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, file type to use. The correct option is CSV. To the next statement, required properties for each user. The correct option is username and display name. Question 15. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that contains the users shown in the following table. You need to configure group-based licensing to meet the following requirements. To all users, deploy an Office 365 E3 license without the Power Automate license option. To all users, deploy an Enterprise Mobility plus Security E5 license. To the users in the research department only, deploy a Power BI Pro license. To the users in the marketing department only, deploy a Visio Plan 2 license. What is the minimum number of deployment groups required? The correct option is C3. We need a total of 3 groups. Group 1, all users. Deploy EMS plus S E5 license and O 365 E3 license with Power Automate for Office 365 disabled. Group 2 Research Group. Deploy Power BI Pro license. Group 3 Marketing Group. Deploy Visio Plan 2 license. Version 16 Hotspot. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 tenant. You need to ensure that administrators are notified when a user receives an email message that contains malware. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. Which type of policy should you create, and which Microsoft Purview Solutions role is required to create the policy? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, policy type. The correct option is alert. To the next statement, role. The correct option is security administrator. Question 17, hotspot. You have a Microsoft 365 E3 subscription. You plan to launch attack simulation training for all users, which social engineering technique and training experience will be available. To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, social engineering technique. The correct option is credential harvest. To the next statement, training experience. The correct option is mass market phishing. Question 18, hotspot. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that uses Microsoft Defender for Office 365. The subscription has the default inbound anti-spam policy and a custom safe attachments policy. You need to identify the following information: the number of email messages quarantined by 0-hour auto purge, the number of times users clicked a malicious link in an email message, which email and collaboration report should you use. To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, statement. To identify the number of emails quarantined by ZAP. The correct option is Mailflow status report. To the next statement, to identify the number of times users clicked a malicious link in an email. The correct option is URL threat protection. Question 19, hotspot. You have a new Microsoft 365 E5 tenant. Enable security defaults is set to yes. A user signs in to the tenant for the first time. Which multi-factor authentication method can the user use, and how many days does the user have to register for MFA? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, to the answer area, MFA method. The correct option is notification to Microsoft Authenticator app. To the next statement, number of days. The correct option is 14. Question 20. Your network contains an on-premises Active Directory domain named contoso.com. The domain contains the objects shown in the following table. You configure Azure AD Connect to sync contoso.com to Azure AD. Which objects will sync to Azure AD? The correct option is D, Group 1, User 1, and User 2. Global security groups from your on-premises AD are synchronized to Azure AD, and they retain their membership and other attributes during the synchronization process. This means that if you have global security groups defined in your on-premises AD and these groups contain users or other groups, the membership information will be replicated to Azure AD. Disabled user accounts are also synchronized. Question 21. Hotspot. Your network contains an on-premises Active Directory domain. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. You plan to implement directory synchronization. You need to identify potential synchronization issues for the domain. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. What should you use? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, statement, tool. The correct option is ID fix. To the next statement, required group membership. The correct option is domain users. Question 22, hotspot. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. You need to implement identity protection. The solution must meet the following requirements. Identify when a user's credentials are compromised and shared on the dark web. Provide users that have compromised credentials with the ability to self remediate. What should you do? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, statement, to identify when users have compromised credentials, configure. The correct option is a user risk policy. To the next statement, to enable self remediation, select. The correct option is require password change. Question 23. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that contains the resources shown in the following table. You create a sensitivity label named Label 1. To which resource can you apply Label 1? The correct option is E, Group 1, Group 2, and Site 1. Question 24. Hotspot. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You need to review metrics for the following: the daily active users in Microsoft Teams, recent Microsoft service issues. What should you use? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, Teams daily active users. The correct option is usage reports. To the next statement, recent Microsoft service issues. The correct option is service health. Question 25. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that uses an Azure AD tenant named Contoso.com. The tenant contains the users shown in the following table. You add another user named user5 to the user administrator role. You need to identify which two management tasks user5 can perform. Which two tasks should you identify? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are A and E. That is, delete user 2 and user 4 only, and reset the password of user 2 and user 4 only. Question 26. Hotspot. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that contains the groups shown in the following table. All the groups are deleted. Which groups can be restored and what is the retention period? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, groups that can be restored. The correct option is Group 3 only. For the next statement, retention period. The correct option is 30 days. Question 27. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. You need to create a mail enabled contact. Which portal should you use? The correct option is A, the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Question 28. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You need to implement a passwordless authentication solution that supports the following device types: Windows, Android, iOS. The solution must use the same authentication method for all devices. Which authentication method should you use? The correct option is A, the Microsoft Authentication app. Question 29. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that contains an Azure AD tenant named Contoso.com. The tenant includes a user named User1. You enable Azure AD identity protection. You need to ensure that User1 can review the list in Azure AD identity protection of users flagged for risk. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. To which role should you add User1? The correct option is C, Security Administrator. The risky sign-in reports are available to users in the following roles: Security Administrator, Global Administrator, and Security Reader. Question 30. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that has Microsoft Defender for Endpoint integrated with Microsoft Intune. Devices are enrolled to Microsoft Intune and onboarded by using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. You plan to block devices based on the results of the machine risk score calculated by Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. What should you create first? The correct option is C, a device compliance policy. Configure a device compliance policy that takes into consideration the Defender for Endpoint to define if a device is compliant or not compliant. Question 31. You have a Microsoft E5 subscription. You need to ensure that administrators who need to manage Microsoft Exchange Online are assigned the Exchange administrator role for 5 hours at a time. What should you implement? The correct option is A, Azure AD, Privileged Identity Management. Question 32. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that contains more than 2000 guest users. You need to ensure that when guest users are added to Microsoft 365 groups in the subscription, their membership is validated by the group owner every 30 days. What should you configure? The correct option is C, access reviews. Access review policy can request the owner to check the membership for guests every 30 days. Question 33. Your network contains an Active Directory domain. You have an Azure AD You have an Azure AD tenant that has security defaults disabled. Azure AD Connect is configured for directory synchronization. Password hash synchronization and pass-through authentication are disabled. You need to enable Azure AD identity protection to detect leaked credentials. What should you do first? The correct option is A. From Azure AD Connect, enable password hash synchronization. Question 34. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. You need to create a mail enabled contact. Which portal should you use? The correct option is D. The Exchange Admin Center. Question 35. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription that uses Microsoft Defender for Office 365 and contains a user named user1. User emails a product catalog in the PDF format to 300 vendors. Only 200 vendors receive the email message, and user 1 is blocked from sending email until the next day. You need to prevent this issue from reoccurring. What should you configure? The correct option is A. Anti-spam policies. Question 36. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription. You have a data loss prevention policy that blocks sensitive data from being shared in email messages. You need to modify the policy so that when an email message containing sensitive data so that when an email message containing sensitive data is sent to both external and internal recipients, the message is only prevented from being delivered to the external recipients. What should you modify? The correct option is D. The policy rule actions. You need to adjust the actions taken by the DLP policy when it detects sensitive data. Specifically, you want to allow internal recipients to receive the email while blocking it only for external recipients. This can be achieved by modifying the actions associated with the policy rule. Typically, you would set different actions for internal and external recipients to achieve this. Internal recipients can be allowed to receive the message, while external recipients can be blocked or receive a different notification. Question 37. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that uses Microsoft Defender for Office 365 and contains a mailbox named Mailbox 1. You plan to use Mailbox 1 to collect and analyze unfiltered email messages. You need to ensure that Defender for Office 365 takes no action on any inbound emails delivered to Mailbox 1. What should you do? The correct option is C. Configure Mailbox 1 as a SecOps mailbox. Question 38. You have a Microsoft 365 subscription that uses retention policies. You implement a preservation lock on a retention policy that is assigned to all executive users. Which two actions can you perform on the retention policies after you implemented the preservation lock? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are A and D, that is, add allocations to the policy and extend the duration of the policy. Question 39. You are testing data loss prevention policy to protect the sharing of credit card information with external users. During testing, you discover that a user can share credit card information with external users by using email. However, the user is prevented from sharing files that contain credit card information by using Microsoft SharePoint. You need to prevent the users from sharing the credit card information by using email and SharePoint. What should you configure? The correct option is A. The locations of the DLP policy. Question 40. You have a Microsoft 365 E5 tenant. You create an auto labeling policy to encrypt emails that contain a sensitive info type. You specify the locations where the policy will be applied. You need to deploy the policy. What should you do first? The correct option is A. Run the policy in simulation mode. Simulation mode is a unique to auto-labeling policies and woven into the workflow. You cannot automatically label documents and emails until your policy has run at least one simulation.